There is a curious affliction among the most sensitive among us, and it is often mistaken for virtue. I have encountered it in my patients, in my dreams, and in the silent confessions of the collective unconscious. These are individuals who believe they are loving when in truth they are disappearing. They call it compassion, but their souls whisper of captivity. You who feel too much, you must understand the boundary between love and emotional possession is perilously thin, especially for the empath. Let us begin by naming the phantom. The empath by nature feels the pain of the other as though it were their own. This is not metaphor. The body reacts, the breath shortens, the stomach churns, and the heart trembles not for one's own wound, but for the suffering that belongs to another. And herein lies the danger. When the border between the self and the other becomes porous, the soul begins to dissolve. The psyche, overwhelmed by the flood of another's emotions, can no longer distinguish where it ends and where the other begins. What masquerades as intimacy may in fact be a form of unconscious invasion. I recall the dream of a woman who found herself in a vast cathedral, kneeling before a statue. The statue's face was hers, but the eyes were hollowed out and dark. She reached out to touch it and felt the cold seep into her bones. She awoke in terror. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means," I told her, "that you are worshipping the part of yourself that vanishes for others. But the eyes, they are gone, because you cannot see yourself when you disappear." To feel deeply is not in itself pathological. The gift of sensitivity, when tempered with consciousness, can heal. But unexamined, it becomes a pact one forged in the unconscious realms where shadow and persona collide. Many empaths unknowingly enter this dark contract. They offer their emotional energy in exchange for love, connection, or approval. But what they receive is not true communion, it is dependency masked as affection. What you think is love may in fact be a psychic binding. Look closely. Is the person you love uplifted by your presence, or do they siphon your energy like a root taps water from the soil? Do you feel expanded or drained? Does your intuition grow, or is it clouded by confusion? These are not merely questions of behavior, but of psychic structure. The archetype of the martyr, noble, suffering, self-sacrificing, is powerful in the unconscious of the empath. But it is a seductive archetype, and like all archetypes, it demands a price. In dreams, it often appears as a woman dressed in white, walking into the sea, serene, devoted, and vanishing. There is a secret that the unconscious keeps from the empath until they are ready. Not all who suffer want to be healed, and not all who cry out for love are willing to carry their own soul. Many seek not love, but a vessel into which they may pour their darkness, a scapegoat upon whom they may cast their shadow. And the empath, without knowing, accepts this role not out of foolishness, but because of an archetypal pull towards salvation. This is not evil, it is unconsciousness, but it is perilous. In my work, I have seen countless individuals mistake possession for devotion. They become entangled in the complex of the wounded savior. The empath enters a relationship not as themselves, but as the redeemer of the other's brokenness. This is not love, this is projection. You see, love, in its truest form, requires two whole selves. It is a meeting of individuated souls, not an annexation. The danger for the empath is that they do not always know where their soul ends and the other's begins. They merge, not out of manipulation, but out of an unconscious longing to be needed, to be seen, to be saved through service. This is the shadow of the empath, a shadow that wears the face of light. The unconscious, however, cannot be deceived. It knows when the soul has been hijacked, even if the ego calls it love. Symptoms will begin to appear: exhaustion without cause, anxiety that rises like a phantom wave, a persistent feeling of guilt when asserting one's needs. These are not emotional quirks, they are cries from the self, signaling that the archetypal balance has been violated. One must ask, is this relationship serving my individuation, or is it consuming it? In dreams, possession often manifests as physical paralysis. I recall the dream of a man who found himself unable to speak as another sat upon his chest. The face of the intruder was blurred but familiar. He struggled, cried out, but no sound emerged. This, I told him, is what happens when the unconscious contract is no longer sustainable. His soul was being occupied not out of malice, but because he had failed to assert his psychic sovereignty. The empath must learn this. To feel is not to fuse. The unconscious is not interested in maintaining your image of yourself as the good one, the healer, or the one who always understands. It is interested in truth. And the truth is this. Many who feel too much have been carrying burdens that were never theirs to hold. They believe they are loving, when in fact they are bound. And love, true love, cannot grow in chains. To break the contract, one must awaken, not through rage or rejection, but through the sacred act of becoming whole. This means descending into the shadow the parts of oneself that feel selfish, angry, resentful, and integrating them. It means honoring the boundaries of the soul, not as walls, but as the sacred lines that protect the self. To awaken from this unconscious possession is to undergo a psychic rebirth, and like all rebirths, it begins in the underworld. The empaths, upon realizing they have not truly been loving, but instead have been surrendering their soul, often feels grief, and it is right to grieve. For what dies is the illusion that self-erasure is noble, that bearing the pain of others makes one whole, that disappearing for someone else will make them stay. These are myths told by the ego to avoid confronting the deeper truth. You feared abandonment more than you feared annihilation. But it is in this moment of confrontation that the soul begins to stir. The old archetype, the wounded healer, starts to transmute. No longer is your value tied to your suffering. No longer must you sacrifice your joy at the altar of someone else's chaos. The empath must reclaim the sacred fire, not to give it away, but to illuminate the temple of the self. And here, we enter the terrain of the shadow. It is not easy. The empath often represses their shadow side, the part that wants to say no, that hungers for freedom, that dares to feel anger, resentment, rage. They believe these impulses make them bad. But these very feelings are the guardians of your inner boundary. They are the immune system of the soul. Without them, you are open not in spiritual generosity, but in psychic vulnerability. You are a house with no door, and the winds of other people's storms will blow straight through you. To feel everything is not wisdom. To feel with discernment is. Many of you have been told that to be sensitive is to be weak, so you have fought that label with even greater acts of self-denial. But I tell you, sensitivity is not weakness, it is power misunderstood. In ancient symbols, the most intuitive beings were also the most feared. Oracles, seers, priestesses, they did not dissolve into the emotions of others. They listened, they channeled, but they remained rooted. Their temples were sacred for a reason. Not everyone was allowed to enter. You must now build your inner temple and decide what energies are allowed to dwell there. Let me speak plainly now. The relationship that drains you is not love. The feeling of being needed, if it comes at the cost of your aliveness, is not holy. The belief that you must be everything for someone else is not divine. It is a wound masquerading as devotion. And that wound perhaps first opened in childhood, when love was conditional, when presence depended on your compliance, has grown into a pattern. This is what we call a complex. It is alive in the unconscious, and it repeats itself, seeking resolution. But the unconscious does not resolve patterns by logic. It requires ritual, descent, confrontation. It speaks in symbols, dreams, synchronicities. You will know you are awakening from emotional possession when your dreams begin to shift, when you see yourself speaking for the first time in a dream, or standing behind a locked door, or holding a weapon not in violence, but in sovereignty. These are signs the psyche is preparing you to individuate. You were never meant to be consumed. You were meant to connect. Love is not a fire that eats away your oxygen. It is a hearth, a center, a light. And the paradox is this: only when you cease to be everything for everyone can you finally become who you are. The alchemical marriage, the union of opposites, requires the union of your own inner opposites first. The empaths must marry their own strengths. Only then can they love without losing themselves. I once saw in a dream a woman dancing in a field of ash. The wind blew, and her dress turned black with soot. She continued to spin, even as the ground crumbled beneath her. I asked her name, and she replied, "I am the one who stays too long." That dream has stayed with me. How many of us have danced on the ruins of ourselves, believing we were doing it for love? And so I say to you, examine your patterns. Examine the moments where your soul whispers leave, but your mouth says, I'm fine. Examine the places where you shrink, apologize, disappear. These are not acts of love, they are echoes of a self who learned early that safety comes from silence. But the self, the true self, does not want silence, it wants authenticity, it wants voice, it wants flame. You cannot reach individuation by pretending to be smaller than you are. The journey requires wholeness, not perfection, but presence. And to be present, you must inhabit your own body, your own boundaries, your own breath. Presence is not merely being there for others. Presence is being there for yourself fully, unapologetically, luminously. It is anchoring your awareness in the sanctum of your own soul, so that when the tides of another's emotion rise to pull you under, you remain steady, not detached, not cold, but sovereign. There is a great difference. Empaths often confuse merging with connection, but to merge is to lose one's shape. To connect is to touch without absorption. The first is a dissolution of self, the second, a sacred meeting. Love, real love, requires a boundary, a vessel, a container strong enough to hold both flame and form. When the vessel is weak, the fire consumes. When it is strong, the fire warms, heals, and purifies. Do you see now how love becomes possession? When the other's needs invade you like a spirit entering an open temple, when your body becomes a repository for someone else's chaos, when you call it love, but it feels like drowning, that is not intimacy. That is enmeshment. And enmeshment is not the holy dance of union. It is a bondage forged in fear and unconscious agreements. Often we think we are choosing love, but what we are truly choosing is the familiar, the haunting echo of a parent's mood swings, a childhood of walking on eggshells, the memory of being seen only when useful, needed, quiet. The empath walks into the fire thinking it is warmth, not realizing it is the fire of an old ghost. A ghost called, if I can just love them enough, I will finally be safe. But the psyche cannot be deceived. The unconscious holds every memory not only of what happened, but how it felt. And when you betray your own soul for the illusion of closeness, your dreams will whisper it first. You will dream of drowning, of voiceless screams, of locked doors and endless hallways. These are not nightmares to be feared. They are maps. Maps back to yourself. What the world often misses is that empaths are not weak. They are powerful, too powerful. Their very gift is also their greatest danger. The ability to psychically tune in, to feel what others cannot say, to enter emotional realms others avoid. But without grounding, without discernment, that gift becomes a curse. It binds you not only to pain, but to the belief that pain is your purpose. You were not born to be a sponge. You were born to be a mirror of truth. In alchemy, we speak of transmutation, of turning base matter into gold. The empath's task is similar. You must learn to transmute your wound into wisdom, to feel deeply, yes, but not to be devoured by it, to see into the soul of another, but not at the cost of your own sight. This is the sacred balance. Let us descend even further. In the archetypal landscape of the soul, emotional possession is often symbolized by the archetype of the siren, a beautiful, haunting figure who calls to the empath, not with love, but with need. She is seductive, not sexually, but spiritually. She sings in the key of your wound. And the empath, unless awakened, follows. The siren does not seek companionship, she seeks containment. She enters your psyche, binds herself to your nervous system and says, feel this for me. You think it is compassion, it is not, it is unconscious agreement. And yet, there is no need to fear her, for the siren is not evil. She is the shadow of love, love that has not yet matured. She is the cry of the abandoned inner child, the unmothered pain of the past, the unmet hunger that still echoes through your relationships. To see her clearly is to begin to disarm her, not through violence, but through clarity. Through saying, I see you, but I do not belong to you. To the empaths, this act feels cruel, but it is not cruelty. It is the highest act of love, the love of truth. For when you release the other from your psychic web, you invite them to stand on their own. You stop saving them, and in doing so, you invite them to save themselves. Let me be clear, empaths do not need to stop loving. They need to start loving differently. Love that heals does not rescue. It recognizes, it holds without absorbing, it listens without dissolving, it mirrors without losing its own reflection. True healing begins when you stop asking, how can I help them feel better? And start asking, what is this doing to me? Because the real soul work, the sacred task, is not about saving others. It is about remembering who you are beneath the roles you've been assigned. Beneath the healer, the listener, the forgiver, the peacemaker, there is the self. And the self does not beg for crumbs in the name of love. The self sits at the feast of wholeness and waits not for the perfect other, but for the alignment within. Then, and only then, does love arrive. Not as need, but as recognition. I have often said that the greatest danger to the soul is not hatred, nor rage, nor grief, but unconsciousness. It is not the emotion itself that wounds, but the possession of the ego by that which it does not yet recognize. And so it is with love. What we call love is often only the mask of an archetype playing out behind the veil of our blindness. If we are to awaken, we must learn to see what is moving us, what is pulling the strings, whispering behind the scenes. You may believe you are choosing your relationships consciously, but unless you have faced the shadow within, unless you have met the orphaned parts of your soul that cry out in silence, you are not choosing. You are being compelled. And for the empath, this compulsion often takes the form of what looks like devotion. The empath feels on a cellular level that they must help, must absorb, must heal. But if we examine this closely, not with shame, but with sacred curiosity, we find that beneath the loving gesture is a hidden fear. That without this merging, without this constant tending, one will be abandoned, unseen, unchosen. This is the primal wound. And it does not make you weak, it makes you human. But it must be brought into the light. For as long as the wound remains hidden, it will direct your love toward those who feed on your silence, not your soul. I have watched many empaths unconsciously become the home for another's chaos. They mistake the intensity of entanglement for intimacy. They mistake volatility for depth. They confuse being needed with being loved. And in doing so, they create a prison not only for themselves, but for the very person they are trying to rescue. There is a truth few are willing to say aloud. Not every person is ready to be helped. and the desire to save them, if unchecked, becomes a form of domination cloaked in benevolence. You become the possessor. You bind them to your help. You deny them the dignity of their own process. This too is a form of possession, not theirs over you, but yours over them. This is how shadow begets shadow. But there is another way. When you bring awareness into the wound, you unbind yourself from the need to act it out. You no longer need to love in order to be validated. You no longer need to suffer in order to be seen. You no longer need to carry what is not yours. Instead, you become the vessel through which love moves, without stickiness, without hooks, without attachment to outcome. This is divine love. This is what Christ embodied, what the mystics knew, not the sentimental love of fusion, but the grounded love of presence. This is the love that says, I will walk beside you, but I will not carry you. This is the love that whispers, I see your pain, but I trust your path. This is the love that declares, I am with you, but I do not disappear for you. To arrive here, one must undergo a kind of death. The death of the rescuer persona, the death of the compulsive giver, the death of the identity built on emotional martyrdom. And yes, that death is terrifying, because it feels in the beginning like you are betraying love itself. But you are not betraying love, you are liberating it from illusion. If you listen deeply, you will hear another voice rising within you. Not the frantic voice of anxiety or the tender voice of longing, but a quiet, steady knowing, a voice that has no agenda but truth. This is the voice of the self. The self is not interested in being loved for sacrifice. It does not seek to earn its place. It simply is. And from this sacred isness, love flows not as a performance, but as a natural emanation. And here, my dear listener, we arrive at the paradox. The more you withdraw from the need to merge, the more deeply you can connect. The more you respect your own soul boundaries, the more your love becomes a sanctuary, not a battlefield. And the more you love yourself with truth, the more you can love others with freedom. This is not a concept to be memorized. It is a reality to be lived, slowly, gently, with reverence. For you are not just breaking patterns, you are breaking spells, ancient spells of guilt, obligation, and inherited suffering. And each time you choose yourself, you are choosing the real. You are stepping out of the enchantment of possession and into the luminosity of presence. The process of liberation from emotional possession cannot be achieved through intellectual understanding alone. The empath must feel their way through it, not in the sense of reacting to emotion, but in the sacred art of witnessing it. To witness is to separate ever so slightly from the experience, to develop what I have called symbolic distance. And this distance, though it may seem cold at first, is not a barrier to love. It is what allows love to remain pure. You must begin to ask yourself, whose pain am I carrying? Whose suffering have I mistaken as my responsibility? Whose chaos have I adopted as my compass? The empath, if not awake, becomes a sponge soaking in the psychic debris of others and mistaking it as their own weather. This fusion, this lack of energetic distinction, is where the danger begins. Not danger from some outer force, but danger from inner confusion. You forget where you end and the other begins. And once this forgetting sets in, your sense of self is vulnerable to the archetypes that seek expression through unconscious hosts. Love, when entangled with possession, ceases to be a bridge between souls and becomes a trapdoor to the unconscious. You may have known such a love. Perhaps you called it fate. You felt magnetized, drawn to someone whose very presence unraveled you. In dreams, they would appear not as themselves, but as symbols, a serpent with golden eyes, a mirror that reflects nothing, a child holding a bleeding rose. These are not merely poetic images. They are the language of the psyche, warning you, summoning you to wakefulness. For when an empath loves unconsciously, they open themselves to projection, not only projecting their longing onto the other, but becoming a screen upon which the other projects their unresolved shadow. It is a reciprocal blindness. And yet, within this blindness lies the seed of awakening. For every projection that shatters, every ideal that crumbles, brings you closer to the real. You weep not because love has failed, but because the mask of illusion has fallen. Do not turn away from that grief. Do not rush to fill the silence it leaves, for in that sacred emptiness you will begin to hear the faint music of your own soul returning. It is the sound of sovereignty. To reclaim yourself from emotional possession is not to become hardened or indifferent. It is to become clear. Your heart does not close. It becomes refined. Your empathy does not vanish. It becomes discerning. You no longer absorb, you sense. You no longer sacrifice, you offer. And you no longer confuse intensity with destiny. Understand this. The archetype of the wounded healer is alive in many empaths. It is a noble archetype, but it must be balanced by the archetype of the wise one, the part of you that knows when to help and when to let go, when to stay and when to walk away. Do not be seduced by the idea that love must always hurt, that to love is to burn endlessly, that if you are suffering, it must be deep. These are the remnants of romantic illusions, mythic distortions passed down through centuries of misunderstood stories. True love, conscious love, brings light, not confusion. It strengthens your essence. It does not ask you to abandon your truth for another's comfort. It does not demand the dismemberment of your identity to maintain proximity. It invites both souls to rise, not to fuse, but to dance. This is the alchemy of love that has passed through the crucible. This is what remains after the fire of shadow work has burned through the enmeshments. It is not flashy, it is not performative, but it is holy. When an empath steps into this sacred maturity, they become a mirror, not a magnet, a presence, not a projection. They begin to walk through the world untouched by the hunger of others, not because they are above it, but because they have become aware of it. They do not reject others, they simply refuse to betray themselves. And in this refusal, they do something remarkable. They teach silently, they become a living symbol of what it means to love without disappearing. And those around them, even those who once tried to consume them, begin to awaken to their own soul. This, beloved listener, is how healing ripples outward, not through rescue, not through martyrdom, but through embodiment. To embody what is whole is not to perform perfection, but to walk in alignment with the deep truth of your inner voice, the one not corrupted by need, nor hijacked by longing, but forged in the quiet furnace of solitude. The empath who has known possession must pass through this solitude like a night sea journey, not to escape the world, but to retrieve themselves from it. There is a particular moment, almost imperceptible, when an empath feels the full weight of what they've carried that was never theirs. It may come during a sudden exhaustion, after tending to yet another emotional crisis, not their own, or in the aftermath of an argument where their very identity was bent in service of maintaining peace, or more often in dreams where they see themselves wearing a mask upon a mask, trying to smile while their shadow weeps behind glass. In such moments, a threshold appears. One side of the threshold whispers, "Keep giving, keep saving, keep disappearing. It is safer than the pain of being misunderstood." But on the other side, often faint, at first another voice emerges, one that sounds like both a memory and a prophecy. It says, come home to your own soul. Crossing that threshold is a birth, and like all births, it is sacred and bloody. I have said before that no transformation comes without the shedding of a former self. For the empath, that self is often constructed from the desires and wounds of others. They must peel away these psychic layers one by one, each one infused with stories that never belonged to them, a mother's sadness, a father's rage, a lover's chaos, a friend's emptiness. To release them is not betrayal. It is the beginning of individuation. And individuation, dear soul, is the antidote to emotional possession. The empath must no longer aspire to be a healer who absorbs pain, but a vessel who transmits light. Not a savior cloaked in self-abandonment, but a soul sovereign in presence. It is not an easy path, for the world often rewards those who sacrifice themselves for others. But the world does not understand the cost, the erosion of the inner kingdom. You may ask, but what of compassion? What of mercy? And I tell you, compassion without boundaries becomes codependency, and mercy without truth becomes manipulation. These distortions masquerade as virtue, but they are ruins wearing the garb of gold. True compassion holds both love and limit. It does not seek to rescue, but to reflect. It trusts that the other, too, has a self and inner guide that must be allowed to rise. To carry another's pain indefinitely is to block the growth of their soul, and worse, it erodes yours. There is a deep and tragic irony in the unconscious empath. They seek to heal wounds by replicating them. They give and give, hoping for reciprocity, but instead invite imbalance. They love harder when they are hurt, as if the other's harm is a signal of their own failure to love well enough. This, dear listener, is not love. This is emotional enmeshment, born of archetypal confusion. It is the echo of the anima or animus, unintegrated, the unconscious feminine or masculine within you, projecting its unmet hunger onto another. The romantic intensity, the spiritual ache, the feeling of cosmic union, all these can be symptoms of archetypal inflation. What you think is divine love may in fact be possession, the psyche, flooding your ego with mythic longings that have nothing to do with the actual human before you. And this is why you must descend into your own unconscious, into the dreams that haunt you, into the places where you are not the hero, not the victim, but the observer. You must go down not to dwell in darkness, but to reclaim your light. For in those depths, you will find the fragments of your true self. The child who felt too much and was told it was wrong. The adolescent who silenced their knowing to fit into a world that could not hold it. The adult who tried to mold their love into whatever shape would be accepted. These are not weaknesses. They are sacred keys. When you gather them, you will begin to remember. Not the kind of remembering that happens in the mind, but the deep soul recall that says, this is who I was before I gave myself away. And with that remembering comes a quiet power. The kind that does not shout nor seek to be validated, but simply is. You begin to radiate a presence that others feel without knowing why. You no longer need to prove your love, because you have become love itself, stable, clear, embodied. Those who once fed on your empathy will feel confused in your presence. Some may lash out, others will fall away. But those who are ready to meet you in truth will rise towards you, not in hunger, but in resonance. And this, dear soul, is the beginning of sacred relationship. When two individuated souls meet, no longer seeking to complete each other, but to witness each other, then what once masqueraded as love is revealed for what it was. Hunger, projection, confusion, ancient wounds seeking balm through the body of another, and what now arises in its place is something infinitely more rare and powerful, communion. In such communion, the empath no longer dissolves to be loved, and the other no longer consumes to feel whole. Instead, both stand in the clarity of their own light and shadow, aware of the sacred burden of their autonomy. They do not try to rescue or reform, for they have seen what happens when love turns to possession. It consumes not only the beloved, but the self. You see, there is a terrible beauty in the act of awakening. It shatters the myths we once believed to survive. And among the most seductive myths is the belief that to love deeply is to suffer endlessly, that the deeper the ache, the purer the connection. But this is a story born from trauma. not truth. Suffering, though a part of life, is not love's requirement. Presence, the empath must come to realize that love which requires the erasure of self is not love, but a ritual sacrifice upon the altar of abandonment. The emotional highs and lows, the intoxication and withdrawal, the ache of distance and euphoria of reunion, these are not the signs of a soul bond, but of an unhealed complex pulling the strings from beneath the surface. Often, in the sacred space of therapy or dream work, the truth begins to emerge. A dream of drowning, of being trapped in a house that isn't theirs, of chasing someone through fog. These are not random phantasms. They are mirrors. They reveal the invisible architecture of the psyche, where the empath has constructed their prison brick by brick in the name of love. But to see the dream clearly is already to loosen the chains. And I say to you, begin by naming what you have never dared name. Speak aloud the truth of how you have abandoned yourself. Do not condemn it. Do not shame it. Simply speak it. For the psyche responds to truth. The way a dark room responds to light, it rearranges itself. You will not need to force healing. You will need only to stop lying to yourself. One of the hardest truths the empath must face is this. Your capacity to feel others so deeply was never the problem. Your inability to feel yourself fully was. For when you finally stand in your own feeling, without drowning, without flinching, you become sovereign. You become what I call psychologically whole. Not perfect, not without pain, but unfragmented. And the one who is whole is no longer a magnet for predators or saviors. They become a mirror, too clear for projection. They reflect not fantasy, but reality. This kind of presence is both feared and revered. Feared by those who depended on your confusion to maintain control, revered by those who are ready to awaken themselves. You will no longer be loved for your wounds, but for your wholeness, and that will feel both lonely and liberating at first. But stay with it. Stay with the discomfort of not shrinking. Stay with the ache of not being needed. This is the chrysalis before the wings. And in time you will learn what it means to love without losing yourself. To say no without guilt. To stay present without absorbing. To hold space without dissolving. To offer your heart without surrendering your soul. This, dear empath, is your true gift. Not your pain, but your presence. Not your sacrifice, but your sovereignty. When you understand that, the spell breaks. The ancestral pain you carried dissolves. The pattern no longer repeats. You become a living interruption in the generational script. And more than that, you become a beacon for others, not by rescuing them, but by reminding them that they too can return to themselves. I have seen it happen. In dreams, in patience, in my own reflection. The one who once curled into themselves, afraid to feel, afraid to say, afraid to be slowly unfurls, not because someone saved them, but because they remembered. And in remembering, they reclaimed every part of themselves that was scattered across the altars of others. This is the mystic path of the empath, a spiral inward, not away from the world, but into the soul, each step a shedding, each wound a doorway, each truth a torch, until at last you stand not above others, but beside your own shadow and say, I see you. I will no longer make you bleed for the sake of being loved. That is where real love begins. When you reach this place of clarity, you no longer chase relationships that echo your unmet childhood longings. You no longer seek chaos to feel aliveness. You no longer accept breadcrumbs in exchange for devotion. The empath who has awakened is no longer enslaved by their own sensitivity, but anointed by its sensitivity, now becomes perception. Perception becomes wisdom, and wisdom becomes light. I do not say this transformation is easy. It is a dying of sorts. You will grieve identities you once wore like skin. You will mourn the illusion of certain loves. You will cry, not just for the pain others caused you, but for the way you betrayed yourself again and again in the name of harmony. And yet, it is in that very grief that the alchemical fire is lit. The fire does not consume, it purifies. And in that fire, the false forms of love, the entanglements, the obsessions, the need for constant reassurance, the fear of abandonment, they begin to melt. What remains is something quieter, more spacious, not a dramatic longing, but a still presence, not possession, but recognition, not emotional fusion, but sacred witnessing. Now, when love comes, and it will, it does not arrive with hooks, but with hands. It does not invade your inner world, but knocks gently, asking permission. It does not need you to collapse to feel powerful. It meets you at the threshold of your being and bows, because you, at last, are whole enough to be truly seen. In your dreams, you will notice the difference. No longer the house on fire or the drowning ocean. Instead, perhaps, a staircase bathed in golden light, a garden being watered after a long drought, a room with many windows open to the wind. These are the symbols of integration. The psyche, once fragmented by emotional over-identification, begins to rebuild itself. The wounded empath becomes the mystic healer. And what a healer you become, not by offering answers, but by embodying presence. Not by fixing others, but by radiating the peace that says, you too can come home to yourself. It is not your pain that makes you powerful. It is your aliveness, your refusal to deaden yourself just to keep another from feeling discomfort. This is what I have always taught, that the true journey is inward, that the monsters we fear are often fragments of ourselves we have yet to name, that the gods and demons of mythology are but images for inner states. That love, at its most transcendent, is not merging, but reflection. For the empath who has grown, love becomes not an escape, but a return to authenticity, a return to balance, a return to truth. And if you are brave enough to make that return, you will discover that even the wounds which once bled you dry become sacred because they taught you what false love looks like. And in contrast, they reveal what real love could be. Boundaried, beautiful, spacious, mutual, not a chain, a dance. Yes, dear soul, you who feel everything, who have suffered much and questioned even more your path, is not a curse, it is a calling. But it is a calling that asks for discernment, for clarity, for fierce self-love. Without it, you will mistake chains for destiny. With it, you will transform pain into wisdom. So remember this, what you thought was love may have been emotional possession, but that does not make you foolish. It makes you human. And it is through that humbling, through that honest reckoning that the door opens. Walk through it. Do not look back. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to become. And when you do, when you truly do, the world will feel your light not as a flare of sacrifice, but as the enduring warmth of someone who has finally come home to themselves. This is your task. This is your liberation. And this, dear empath, is your rebirth.